Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven. Today we're welcoming Melissa Yi, and Melissa is an emergency physician and award-winning writer. In her newest crime novel, Scorpion Scheme, Dr. Hope Sze lands in Cairo and discovers a man with a nail through his skull who might hold the key to millions in buried gold. Previous Hope Sze thrillers were recommended by the Globe and Mail, CBC Books, and the next chapter is one of the best Canadian suspense novels. Yi was shortlisted for the Derringer Award for the world's best short mystery fiction. Under the name MelissaYuan-Innes, she also writes medical humor and has won speculative fiction awards. Her website is MelissaYuan-Innes.com, and we'll be putting it into the description of the podcast below so you can visit her wonderful website. So welcome, Melissa.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeannie.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you started writing?
Sure. I mean, I always loved books. You know how you just find something that feels right to you? So for me, it was books. I could just like dive in there and live forever. So of course, I wanted to be a writer, like right from the get-go. And to be honest, I think there are a lot of poorly written kids' books. So I was just like, even as a kid, I was just like, I can do better than that. So I started writing, and actually it was more when my family moved to Germany when I was 10. And I was like, there weren't that many English books around compared to what I was used to. And I just started writing more avidly.
But how did you end up being a doctor and a writer?
Well, because I still wanted to hedge my bets and not starve to death. So like, I'm going to do medicine. I can write and do medicine at the same time. So no worries.
Yeah.
Of course, it's one of those things that's easier said than done. And like, just there were some rotations like surgery. I could not. There was no way. I wouldn't eat supper until 7 p.m. So not 7 p.m., like 3 a.m. I wouldn't eat lunch until the evening, sort of thing. So there was no way that I could write. But even when I was retracting, I would just try to think of a line to myself. And I would try and write poetry during that time, because if you just write one line, then you're part of the way there.
It's kind of funny, like when I think historically, like when you think about Leonardo and all the other great masters, like they were more than one thing. Like they were more than artists, they were physicians, they were scientists. But I don't know how it came to be that our society is starting to, like specialize in things. Like it's good to specialize, but at the same time, it's sort of, I don't know, it's almost like they don't want people to do more than one thing, I guess, which is kind of weird.
There are advantages to specialization, that you can really get into one niche, but then people really love to categorize and then just watch you into one spot and be like, that, you are, say that it was a writer. Well, you're a writer. And then they were like, well, you're not just a writer, you're a science fiction writer. So you better not write fantasy. And it has to be, and then you'll be like hard science fiction and, only diverse characters or whatever. Like they just keep notching down and down and down. So I rebel against all that. I try to have more than one career and write in multiple genres.
So how do you balance so many things? Like you're a doctor, you're a mother, you're a writer, and I believe you're doing plays now too.
Yes, yeah. This upcoming week we'll be starting a play based on my third novel, Terminally Ill, which is awesome. I think, to be honest, I always do a lot of different things. That's just my personality. So for medicine, I made the choice once I was done. So again, it's just a super intense training program. But then once you're out, I was like, you know what? Now's the time when I could finally start making money, but I would love to write. I felt guilty about this, but it was also the first time in my life that I was allowed to live where I wanted to live, because otherwise you get matched to a certain place and you have to go. That we could buy a house where we wanted to and pick my own schedule, because otherwise it'd just be like Monday, 8 a.m., show up at, this wing at this spot and you're reporting to this physician, otherwise I'm just like, okay, I want to do my own thing. But I felt super guilty. I told my husband and he was like, well, you worked really hard so that you can spend less time working, but make more money.
Mhm.
I was like, okay. I mean, my parents thought I was nuts. You know, they were just like, oh my God, what are you doing? But that's one thing I've always loved about my husband is that he's never felt like we had to stick to one path. He just doesn't think that way. He's just like, who cares?
Well, I told my husband that after, because I'm part of the Canadian Authors Association, we hosted a few panels with female writers. I was like, look at them. They write a lot because they have spouses that, support them. So they don't work except write. And he's like, isn't that nice? That was the end of the conversation. But yeah, I'm sort of like you. Like I didn't start writing and publishing until like I got sort of a steady job and whatnot. But I remember applying on that form for university. I wanted to do English lit, and my parents just flipped out, and they're like, "Why? You want to starve to death? No, and we're not going to support you. Blah blah blah. We're going to disown you." And I was like, "Okay." So yeah. So in a way, eventually, when I did start writing, I did a Kickstarter. I was shocked. My mom actually called me up. I think it was my dad actually. He's like, "We're going to support your Kickstarter, although we think you're begging for money on the streets for some reason, and we don't know why you want to do this." So, uh,
I haven't done Kickstarter yet. I'd love to pick your brain about it.
sure. I mean, I think it's getting harder over the years because there's so much competition. I mean, I think DC and Marvel on Kickstarters now too, and video games. But whatever. I think it's a great marketing tool at the very least because you're almost like you're pre-selling your book, right? Like because people that invest your Kickstarter get a copy of the book, whether it's ebook or paperback, and they get goodies. And I think it's worth doing. Another way is the Indiegogo, right? Because Kickstarter is 100% or nothing, but Indiegogo, at least, even if you don't meet your goal, you'll still get some of the money. So it's another way of doing things. So
I've read up on it, and actually, what I plan to do is a very small Kickstarter, so just
yeah,
like $100 or $200, just to
yeah,
try.
exactly.
Because
Yeah.
one of the things that I liked about it that I was listening to Lauren Coleman and other, people who've done really well on Kickstarter. One thing I feel like is that it's its own ecosystem. So
Mhm.
so ideally, you're not just drawing from your own friends and family and fans, but there are people there who are just like, yeah, that sounds cool. I'm going to support that.
Yeah, yeah, you'll find a lot of strangers and whatnot. I get in trouble sometimes. Like sometimes I tell my friend, "Oh yeah, I'm going to have lunch." I mean, it's pre-COVID, with this guy I met on Twitter, and they're like, "You're doing what? You're so weird." And, I was like, just networking with random people, right?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm not on Twitter enough to network to have lunch with anybody, but if I were, I would totally do it. Yeah.
Yeah, so you learn things. So okay, so the latest crime novel you published is Scorpion Scheme. So what inspired that? And are you continuing on with Dr. Hope?
Yes, exactly. So I knew that I wanted to write a book set in Egypt. And one of the things that was cool was that a travel company approached me, Narat, and said, if we send you to places around the world for free, could you write a novel for us in each place? And I said, sure.
Well, why not? Free vacation.
So I went first to the Ecuador and the Galapagos. Obviously, this was pre-COVID. It's 2019. And then the second place was Egypt. And I always wanted to go to the Galapagos. When I first heard about it in grade 3, I was like, that sounds cool. Just to see the beginning, like to see how evolution was first conceived of, and to see evidence of it, which I did enjoy. It was a lot more barren than I had realized. It's volcanic rock. So that was interesting because I hadn't realized that, the first people found it because they just were drifting. Like they had no idea where they were going. They ended up at the Galapagos, and it ended up being used as a prison colony. So there's also a very sad history to go along with it. With Ecuador as well, of course. And that was interesting. But when I went to Egypt, I was like, this is a place that I've always heard of, but I didn't know very much about, like just very superficial things. Like obviously I'd seen King Tut's mask, and people talked about how the pharaohs would marry like brothers and sisters and stuff, but to actually understand the culture and even have a better understanding of the gods and goddesses besides, just the hieroglyphics, I just didn't know.
Yeah.
And even when I went there, when your life is busy, I didn't have time to research it. So I was just walking through the Valley of Kings and Queens, and I was like, I wish I understand what these things were saying. you know, I can see various symbols and I see that there are people, and you know, I can guess who one of them might be and stuff, but I don't actually know what they're talking about.
Mhm.
And that was a lack. So if you are going to go somewhere, it's much better if you can research it before. Even if you have a tour guide, for example, in the Valley of Kings and Queens, your tour guide is not allowed to come in with you. It's it's not really narrow, but it's still relatively narrow. And there are groups of tourists moving in and out, although not as bad as it was bad. I mean, it's sad for Egypt because tourism has gone down so much, but there used to be hordes of tourists to the point where the condensation from their breath was damaging the images. But I guess because of that, there's just so many people, they wouldn't allow, like tour guides are not allowed to talk in there. They actually have to come in, they have to be silent, or they'll tell you stuff outside. But so it just means you're just walking in knowing nothing. That's really what it means. It can still be very beautiful, but it's, again, it's just like trying to understand an alien culture sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time researching it, and I knew that I would write my own novel. So I wrote a novel for them, an adventure. But this one, well, I knew that Hope was going to go. And the interesting thing was that my tour group, like, they went ahead of me because my son had his birthday and I didn't want to miss his birthday. So I joined them like 36 hours later. And I missed the pyramids, which was really too bad. But when I was on the plane, I was talking to a gentleman beside me, and he was like, well, you know about the bomb? And I was like, the bomb? And he was like, yes, the bomb in Giza at the pyramids. And I was like, ooh, my tour group was supposed to be there. And sure enough, when I landed, I found out about it, and that they had set off a bomb, and that it was mostly South African tourists and a few Egyptians who were affected. Luckily, nobody was killed. But that did happen. So I was like, well, in the end, I was like, this is such a great story for Hope. What if she did go to the bomb? And so I was researching what happened to the tourists. And I found out that, for example, a lot of them had eye injuries because of the flying glass. And, you know, all bombs are different, and you can have, I want to call them foreign bodies, but, you know, just, you can put shrapnel in the bomb, basically. So I was like, what if that happened? And when I look up Johannesburg and stuff like that, I end up finding like the Kruger millions, like this fabled treasure. And I was like, wouldn't it be great if they could start researching that? Because the other thing I knew was that for the pandemic, I didn't want to have some extremely, like, I wasn't going to write a pandemic book. I knew that. So to write one that was actually more about a treasure hunt was more fun for me. And I thought for everybody else.
Oh, there's so many pandemic books. Pre-pandemic, there are already pandemic books. So
Exactly.
I'm sure they're gonna be a lot later as well. So what book number is this for in the Hope Sze series? Like, how many do you want to do? Oh my God, 8. Okay. Are you gonna keep going, or are
We're
you
fine
gonna?
right now. Like,
Okay.
I love her because she's me, you know,
Okay.
just
Yeah.
so, you know, I don't want to abandon her, and people really like her.
Mhm.
So I don't see letting her go. I mean, obviously I can write other things, but I just feel like I could follow her forever, pretty much, as long as I have something that interests me. So I did kind of cast around and be like, what should I do for number 9? It's always hard because you don't want to, like, for me, I always want to do something different, and I don't want to repeat myself. So it has to be something exciting. And what would that be? Like, what haven't I done in the last 8 books?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you got started publishing. Like, what kind of hurdles did you think you faced, and how did you actually start getting published? Because right now you're pretty prolific, but I mean, at the beginning,
So
what
short
kind of
stories
things did you do?
are the easiest for me, because I like, to me, like, just novels were enormous,
Mhm.
but I knit those together, and I like to get paid. So,
There you go. Very frank here. I like money. Yes.
and my husband, like, we were dating in high school, like we've been together since high school, and he was always like science fiction and some fantasy. So he was like, okay, here are some magazines, they pay. Why don't you just try there? And I was like, okay, like, when you're just like, all right, I'll just try whatever. And I did. And one of the things he had bought was Writers of the Future. So I was like, great, that looks like a good contest because it's only for new writers and illustrators. So you're not competing with all the established people. They pay you $1,750 or $500, depending on which place you make. And then they'll pay you for the anthology if you get published, and they'll fly you out for a week-long workshop. So I was like, okay, that sounds good. But I was just writing for everyone, like, and anyone. And probably the beginning stuff wasn't great, right? But I would just do it and get rejection letters, which is tough. So I think one thing I would tell people is, like, persistence is so important. To just, you believe in yourself, and then you have something to say, and then you're getting better every time. Like, I could go back and be like, oh, the beginning isn't strong, and they're not going to keep going if the beginning is not compelling. So back to the drawing board, and just keep improving. And so my very first short story was published in Parsec, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was a science fiction magazine put out of Sudbury, I think. And I was sitting at med school checking my email in the library, and I was like, oh! But so one of the other guys was like, what is it? And I'm like, oh, my first short story has been accepted. And he's like, oh, congratulations. But obviously, like other people in med school, they don't realize, like, for years I had been sending out and not getting anything. And I was just thinking of how, like, when I was a student too, like, I'd be like, well, if they're going to send me a rejection, and I'm here just in my dorm room for the year, like, it could happen in the summer, and I could be in a different place. So I would always have it sent to my parents' house. And then my parents would be like, well, you got another rejection.
Why are you doing this?
More embarrassing.
Yeah.
When I went to Prince Edward Island to see Anne of Green Gables and everything like that, Ellen Montgomery, I actually didn't enjoy the Green Gables part so much. Like, when you're at the haunted forest, they've only left out part of the trees, and you can hear the people playing golf next door. So it's kind of sad. But you can just walk into the post office where she used to work. And she has said that if she had said that if she hadn't worked in the post office where only she knew that she was sending it out and it was coming back, she would have lost heart. But because she was there, she would just say, like, okay, send it back out again.
Rip it up there. Rip it up at work. Yeah.
Nobody can hear you scream. Little PEI post office in 1910 or whenever she was. So yeah, that's how I got started. And then I kept going, and I did win second place in Rise of the Future in my last year in med school. And again, like, it just seems funny. Like, I had submitted 2 or 3 times and not gotten anything. And I was like, well, I'll show them. I'm not going to submit to them. I mean, I didn't necessarily do that consciously. I just stopped submitting. And then I submitted my story Skin Song, and it was second place. And when I went there, so you're there with all the winners from each quarter, and there was at least one finalist as well. And we were all talking, and you get matched up with a twin, like you get a friend during the program. And we were chatting, and I realized that I most admired the people who had submitted for years. Like, 4 times a year, they were just one more story, they would just keep writing new stuff and getting better and better. And one of the first place guys, it was his first story.
Oh, wow.
Ever written. So of course they loved that. They thought it was really great. But his wife had been submitting for a long time and hadn't placed. So yeah, that was tough. But when I look back afterwards, like, she wrote novels, and I don't think he ever did.
Yeah. Okay.
So, when it's just a one-time thing, and you're just like, oh, that was easy. Well, I've done that. I'm done.
Oh, man. But the wife was probably pissed off.
Who last are the ones who really care, and they'll just keep going at it day after day.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, why don't we talk about why you use so many different names?
Oh, okay. Well, as you can see, Melissa Yuan-Innes is a long name, because I added my husband's name when I got married, but people just find that so confusing. So I did publish under that because just I'm a very literal person. So, oh, it's my name, so I'm going to publish under it. And I kept that for fantasy and science fiction and for nonfiction, because usually, you know, like for example, in medical posts, they want you to use your real name. Um, but I always thought that just using the first initials YI made a lot of sense. Like it still sounds Chinese, and so it still is part of my heritage, but is not so long and hard for people to pronounce. So I did that, and then I did temporarily use a different name for like romance and stuff like that, but then it just got too complicated. So now I pretty much just have two names, my legal name and Melissa Yi, and that's it. Because some people would argue that's important. For example, you wouldn't want erotica and children's fiction to have the same name. And for me, I wouldn't necessarily want my fiction to be the first thing to come up if people are researching me as a physician. So it can be a useful thing to have, but it can also be confusing. So, you know, do whatever you want, but maybe probably don't have 2 million of them, that's all.
Okay, I guess we should also answer the question about doctors who write medical crime thrillers. Like, are they better at writing medical crime thrillers, do you think? Because they know more about medicine?
Well, I mean, I would say probably the medicine is more accurate, but
Mhm.
whether they're strong writers is another question.
Yeah,
You want to
that is
have both skills. Some people have both.
true. Good example here. Okay, so why don't you give us a little bit of an intro to what you're going to read, and then you can sort of dive into it.
Okay, awesome. So I thought I would read from Stockholm Syndrome. No, I thought I would read from Stockholm Syndrome is the fourth book. So I have another. So I have
Okay.
another book that starts with SS, and that's one where she is in prison, taken hostage. But I'm going to read from Scorpion Scheme, and I'll read the beginning. So ideally, you will be able to understand what it's like just to land in Cairo. Scorpion Scheme by Melissa Yuan-Innes. 90 minutes before our world screeched to a standstill, I hauled my suitcase outside the Cairo International Airport and squinted as the Egyptian desert wind desiccated my eyeballs and whipped the ends of my black hair into my face. John Tucker laughed and pushed a strand behind my ear. You okay? I'm alive. Hard to believe that we landed safely on the opposite side of the world from Canada, near the only remaining seventh wonder of the ancient world. I didn't want to jinx it. I am magnificent. Tucker spread his arms wide, relishing the mild January afternoon sun, not to mention his own magnificence. I leaned back to make sure he didn't knock off my glasses, but I couldn't help smiling and shaking my hair at the pale skin of his neck and his wheat blonde hair. Sometimes I found it hard to believe that I'd ended up with such a milky dude. Tucker called up to the wisps of cloud in the blue sky overhead. We could climb Mount Sinai. We could visit the Valley of Kings and Queens. I adjusted the backpack straps digging into my shoulders and double-checked the suitcase between my legs. We could figure out what happened to Yusuf. Ms. Isabel Antoon had assured us that a guide named Yusuf would meet us at the airport and that our 1-month medical elective would be perfectly arranged by Sarkay Industries, a healthcare software corporation. What on earth had happened to him or them? I slipped my iPhone out of my pocket, checked my blank notifications, and called Yusuf again. Then I left a voicemail. Again. Tucker kissed the top of my head while I sighed and hung up. He said, he'll be here any minute. Let's get him to show us Cairo before we get stuck in the hospital. You know how I was bummed to miss the coffin of Nejamank at the Met last year? Well, it's being repatriated here next week. Plus, we could go see King Tut's sarcophagus. He had 3 coffins. The innermost one was made of solid gold. Or we could watch the sunset behind the Great Pyramids of Giza. We could rent a felucca and sail the Nile. My friend Reza says he knows a guy who could set us up. Maybe the pyramids. They'd drawn me here, even though a free trip to Egypt sounded too good to be true. Tucker wrapped his arm around me and smacked a kiss on my cheek. Thanks for trusting me on this, Hope. A free trip to Egypt. How could we turn that down? Free lunch, I said, as in no such thing as. Gift horse, he replied with an extra arm squeeze, meaning no looking in the mouth. Isabel had refused to tell us why Sarkay Industries had picked us for a free visit. Why me and Tucker, two no-name family medicine residents halfway through what used to be called an internship? Sure, she'd handed us platitudes about Sarkay's commitments to worldwide health through excellence in electronic records, patient registration and billing, snooze, Egypt's doctor shortage, true, and the relationship between Egypt and China, huh? When I told her that my background is Chinese, but I'd never been there, she'd wave the maple leaf flag. Egypt and Canada have been friends since the Egyptian Revolution in 1952. You will always be welcome in our country. Right, but they weren't treating 30 million Canadians to a free trip. Only us. Very strange. I gave Tucker a one-armed hug before releasing him, minimizing public affection out of respect for the predominantly Muslim country. It's weird that we can't find Yusuf. You'd think he'd meet us at the gate with a sign like in the movies. I know, said Tucker, but he closed his eyes and leaned into the sunshine, so obviously besotted with Egypt that I gave in and sniffed the air. It smelled flowery rather than the usual stench of airplane fuel and cleanser. It smelled the way you might imagine Prince Edward Island might smell if you only saw the red sand in pictures. Is it possible to smell the desert? Beautiful, I conceded. And Tucker's smile widened, even though he kept his eyes closed. We must have taken a back door out of the airport because I'd expected touts ushering us into overpriced taxis, but I only noticed a few men in uniforms, including two in military garb, who barely glanced at us Canadian tourists, the white guy and the Asian woman hauling our own backpacks and suitcases. But why, after a night flight from Montreal to Vienna and a second flight to Cairo, had no one come to meet us? After a full minute of fresh air, I broke the silence. You think Yusuf's looking for us at a different door? Did he text you? Not yet, Tucker frowned and checked his messages, but at least we have our SIM cards. Ah yes, the SIM cards. Shortly after we landed and bought our Egyptian visas, Tucker had led me to a booth for local smart cards to avoid roaming phone charges from Canada. The SIM cards took forever because they photocopied our passports and made us sign agreements in Arabic. Tucker had said that from what he knew of Arabic, the paperwork looked legit. Yusuf will find us. I texted him a picture of us. He won't be able to miss your outfit. Tucker grinned, crinkling his eyes, in a good way. In an E. coli way. Pre-visa and SIM cards while taking turns at the airport bathrooms, my toilet hadn't flushed properly. When I'd pushed a second lever at foot level, assuming that the wall button was broken, the toilet had sprayed me with water from chest to feet. Luckily, Tucker had been waiting and laughing with my dry suitcase. I'd switch into a fuchsia t-shirt, a red hibiscus sarong, and dry sandals. Tucker. I waved my hand in front of his face before he started to hee-haw too much at the soggy plastic bag tied to my suitcase. If we can't connect with Isabel, Yusuf, or Sarkay Industries, we better come up with a plan B. That's true, he grinned at me. Good thing I've got one. My friend Reza came through. His grandmother lives in Giza. He said we could stay with her tonight. Tucker, Isabel sent us our hotel listing and the name of the hospital we'll be working at. Shouldn't we stick to the plan? Of course, I would have been more fond of the plan if Isabel or her designate had met us or answered our calls. And I got tachycardic at the thought of having to pay for the hotel myself. Med school tuition is bankruptcy worthy. Resident doctors make almost no money, and my student debt literally kept me up at night. What if, in addition to ghosting us at the airport, Isabel and Yusuf transferred us the bill for the entire trip? Tucker's slightly bushy eyebrows knitted together. This is a better plan. One apartment in hand is worth 2 hotel rooms in the ether, right? My jet-lagged brain took a few seconds to figure out that he was making a joke about a bird in hand, 2 in the bush, and maybe a reference to the burning bush while he was at it. Reza says his grandmother will love us, and she makes the best tamaya. At my blank look, he said, that's falafel to you, only made with fava beans and full of spices. My stomach gurgled on cue. Is Grandma expecting us? Tucker grinned. And that is why you're the woman I'm going to marry. Because I'm hungry all the time? He winked at me. Passion, baby. I winked back, even though I was pretty sure passion would be out of the question in Granny Reza's house. Still, I adored Tucker's encouragement in my quest to eat any and every food. One friend's mother said she'd never marry a guy who had smaller thighs than hers. I'd never marry a guy who shamed me over my appetite. So we'll take a taxi? I've always wanted to see the pyramids. Not sure if it's near the zoo, but Tucker rolled his suitcase to the left. The buses should be over here. I'm not a snob. I take public transport all the time. However, in a foreign country, schlepping around my toilet clothes and shoes after traveling for 14 hours, I yearned for the most direct route. How would we know if we were on the right bus? I'll ask. He already made it halfway to a line of blue buses. Almost everyone in the airport has switched to English upon hearing his Arabic. How could I say this tactfully? Right, I am. It's just, I gestured at my soggy sack of clothes because who'd want to haul that around? Plus, I've been warned that guys may grope you on a bus, although not so much if you're with a man. He pinched the end of his slightly long nose. I don't think a taxi will get us there any faster than a bus, but I can get you one if you really want, Hope. Now I was a global warming bad guy, even though we'd both hopped a transcontinental flight. Okay, we can take a bus to Giza, but you have to make sure it's the right one. I'm on it. Tucker tried to flag down the first bus, ignoring the fiancé trailing behind him with wet rags, me. I tried not to miss my ex, Ryan Wu, who would have lifted my backpack off my shoulders and hailed a taxi before I opened my mouth. He's classy like that. But I couldn't stay mad at Tucker, who was like a golden retriever, all but sniffing the air and wagging his tail at the closest human. I knew Reza wouldn't let me down, said Tucker. Yay, I said, trying to sound genuinely enthused. I mean, after all, if it hadn't been for Tucker's worldwide network of friends, we might have had to crash at the airport. Was that even legal? I was pretty sure the Egyptian police would arrest hippie squatters, or at least move you to the closest hotel. Plus, it's free, and buses are cheap. That made me laugh. At least he snagged one with air conditioning as a concession to my tender sensibilities. It was weird that they'd left the transparent plastic covers on the seats. You know how they cover sofas when you buy them? Like that, only thin, ripped plastic. The driver, a man with graying curls and small, wire-rimmed glasses, waved me towards the seat. Tucker spoke to him and told me, "Oh, we're supposed to sit down first and then pay." Huh? I think it's so that we don't slow down boarding. Too late for that, but when in Cairo, I swung my suitcase into the first empty two-seater and swung myself beside it. My legs twisted askew. Although Tucker's legs ended up blocking the aisle, men carefully stepped over them, smiling. No threatening vibe at all, even though I was the only woman on the bus. Passengers passed money up to the bus driver, who managed to drive and make change as he looped out of the parking lot. Once we left the airport grounds, he turned on Arabic music, and several men bobbed their heads in time. I cautiously joined them. As we oozed towards the traffic in Giza, Tucker drummed on the empty back seat in front of us. I stayed pretzeled into even less space than on an airplane thanks to our luggage, but Tucker smelled good, more yeasty than usual as I nodded off. Babe, Hope, I murmured in protest. This bus ends at the Hotel of Horus. We have to walk to Abdul Munir Riyadh Square and change buses. All I understood was bus ends. I whimpered, but I shook myself awake like it was yet another night on call. I trusted Tucker to lead me off the bus to the next stop. The Hotel of Horus looked like your typical extra tall white skyscraper. A few brave palm trees lined the busy street. 3 women in headscarves chattered across the street away from the hotel and toward, could it be? I think that's the Nile, Tucker pointed in the distance. Holy crap, the Nile River! I couldn't see much besides cars zooming on a bridge and men talking on their cell phones, but still, I'd read Death on the Nile on the plane. We bumped our luggage towards a bus station with a bright yellow and blue sign featuring a fit, bearded man grinning in front of a bus. People passed us, chatting on their cell phones. Cairo appeared not so different from Montreal at first glance, except the Egyptian flags adorning a smaller hotel's columned second floor. 2 young people in jeans and t-shirts listened to hip-hop, judging from the music leaking out of their headphones. But more than half the women covered their heads, and a man with a long beard wore a full-length gray tunic. Cool. The wheels on my suitcase seemed clogged with dirt and hair, which made it harder to roll over the paving stones under our feet and onto a second bus. All the seats at the front were full. I nodded at a woman with 4 children. A grandmotherly type with a headscarf spoke impatiently on her cell phone. At least 4 elderly men dominated the front benches, their head bent in intense conversation. Tucker and I found seats near the back. We had to shove our suitcases most of the way in and rest our legs on top of them. My feet practically rested in my mouth. How much further? I asked Tucker. Not far, not far. Someone's phone rang. I didn't recognize it as Tucker's until he contorted himself to pull it out of his jeans pocket. Oh, hi, Yusuf. What? You're at baggage claim? We missed you. Maybe because Hope got sprayed by a toilet. I straightened up, my eyes now open and accusing. Tucker ditched a smile fast. Dr. C had trouble with the airport plumbing, and we couldn't get a hold of you, so we're taking bus to Giza. You want us to get off? Where? He craned his neck. I'm not sure exactly where we are. We changed buses at Abdul Munir Riyadh Square. I think we're coming up on the Egyptian Museum. Hang on, I'll open up a map. I reached for my own phone. Wow, Yusuf. We finally got a hold of Yusuf. He could drive us to the hotel. I glanced out the window at the setting sun. No pyramids in sight. I pressed the home button on my phone to bring up a map. And I felt, as much as heard, a boom that rocked the bus and punched my eardrums. Chapter 2. Bus windows rattled. No. Okay. We're going to stop there.
I'll edit it. Okay, well, thank you very much for your reading. It sounded like an action-packed chapter you're reading. So where can people find the book and where can people find you?
Well, people can find the book online, and it's also available in paperback, both through Amazon and through Ingram. And if you want to talk to your local independent bookstore, all you need is the ISBN, and they'll be able to order it for you.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for being on our show, Melissa.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Until next time. For more upcoming episodes of the Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit us at jfgarrard.com/arpodcast. A reminder to Patreon subscribers that there's bonus content available for every episode on the Patreon website. If you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee. The Artsy Raven is produced by J.F. Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and music is by Tim Moore. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay safe.